BRICS Africa Channel in conversation with Deputy Minister of Treasury, Dr. David Masondo. Welcome.
Thanks for Thanks for having me here.
Yes, there have been talks, both in the resolution and during the task force sessions, on debt sustainability for countries that cannot afford paying back their debts, who spend greater part of their GDP servicing the debts rather than investing in infrastructure. So may you please elaborate on the debt sustainability, Lordship?
I think for us the key thing is how do we get economic growth in the global north, in developed countries, but also in the global south, because that's what it's critical. Because as we grow our economies, we'll be in a position to generate enough revenue, not only to service debts, but also to invest in growth-enhancing economic activities. However, the countries that are indebted, as you correctly say, they are paying high interest. The debt service costs are very high, and therefore they affect other important expenditure items that are quite critical for those countries, e.g. investing in education, health, and infrastructure, which is quite critical for them to grow their economies. And therefore, as you know, that is a common framework that has been agreed upon on how you find resolutions to those countries that are in situations where their debt is unsustainable. But the best way and the long-term way of solving the debt trap and unsustainable debt is to grow our economy, invest in infrastructure, but we need capital to flow into those countries. And it's important, therefore, for us to adopt macroeconomic policy stances that keep our debt at sustainable level, because if you do that, it means that the cost of capital will come lower, because the cost of capital is high on the basis of real risks and sometimes perceived risks associated with those countries, particularly on the African continent. So we have also challenged the way in which we are rated as the continent, so that we are fairly priced as and when we go out and raise capital to invest on the African continent.
In simpler terms, what instruments does the common framework of the G20 have in order to implement this resolution?
So in simpler terms, it means that there has to be transparency in the way in which the debt restructuring is done. It also means that there has to be a common approach because in many instances it's not just one country that has lent money to one economies, different countries, and therefore those countries, they need to be, or lenders need to be treated fairly and equally. There should not be any discrimination insofar as the debt resolution is concerned.
This solution borders also on the issue of intra-Africa trade, where we've seen intra-Africa trade for the longest of time at 15%, whilst other continents, the EU and the global north, they enjoy far greater percentage of intra-trade. So with the Africa Continental Trade Agreement in place, what mechanisms should be put in place in order for that to speed up the process of growth and intra-trade we need among African countries?
Infrastructure is very critical to facilitate trade. Adopting the Africa Continental Free Trade was huge advance on the continent, but for us to move goods on the continent, we really need to invest in infrastructure. And our G20 presidency as South Africa, on the front of infrastructure, we've delivered three things. The first one is a toolkit on developing bankable projects. Because a lot of investors, they will say, we're willing to invest on the continent for your infrastructure, but give us a pipeline of investable infrastructure projects. And we've developed a toolkit that should help different countries, not only in South Africa or the continent, but throughout the world. The second issue we have delivered on is how you do cross-border infrastructure around financing, around maintenance, around the PPPs that you need to place, and synchronizing and harmonization of infrastructure policies, because it's not going to be helpful for us as Africa to plan in a manner that is not integrated. You've got Lesotho there, you've got South Africa there, you've got Nigeria there. We've got to think regionally if the African continental free trade is to be successful. The third deliverable that we have delivered through our G20 presidency is the kind of incentives that we've put in place to attract finance to move, capital to move into infrastructure. The incentives that we have put in place to attract investment into infrastructure on our continent. Example, the credit enhancement vehicles, which we're already implementing here in South Africa.
Exactly.
What you're basically doing through that credit enhancement vehicle, you're saying put money into public infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, freight, logistics infrastructure, but to guarantee that you'll get your money back, we have an insurance that we have put in place for you as an investor, just in case something goes wrong in that infrastructure project in which we invested in order to get money back plus more in that infrastructure project. So the blended finance, we've got a report in that regard that we've produced, and we're hoping that different sovereigns on the continent and in the world will adopt the report that we've adopted. And we know that the G20 is not binding, but in many times the G20 resolutions, when they make sense, they get adopted by multilateral financial institution, IMF, World Bank, and so. This is a consequential body. We should not trivialize it and think that its resolutions are inconsequential. They've got huge consequences on how we are governed as people of the world.
Minister mentioned something very important, that we need integration, regional integration, in order to be able to make these resolutions to function also as well. But what will be the vehicle specifically on the African continent, as we say that South Africa is the representative of the entire continent in the G20?
There are a number of vehicles. We do have regional bodies. We also have great financial institutions on the continent, including the African Development Bank. In South Africa, we've got DBSA, which is not only focusing on South Africa, but is also focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. We do have the public sector asset manager like the PIC, which is not only looking in South Africa, it's looking on the continent. We've got huge sovereign wealth funds on the continent which are operating on the continent. And I think for me, is a question of how do we pool these different funds on the continent and deploy the African funds onto the continent? Because as we do that, if the returns are better, the credit ratings, that the risks that are associated with investing in Africa, those myths, those perceived risks, they'll get demolished on the basis of how we're getting the money invested into Africa.
Thank you very much, Minister, for a very insightful conversation.
Thanks for Tembe, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Yeah.